Okay.
I
Would
think
you
it's
have
okay.
a prefer?
I think it's okay to have
Okay.
two men next to each other.
Okay. All right. Okay. As long as it's been.
It shows that we're not saying, "Hey, look, there's a woman."
Okay. Okay.
Yes, true.
Yeah,
Okay, but you
fair enough. Fair enough.
you can't fucking win.
That's correct.
Yeah. At least it's been discussed. That's the
Yes.
main thing.
Sorry, I always have a moment where, because I don't actually know what I do. Yeah, I'm Charlie Waterhouse, and I'm part of the team that organises Hard Art. I don't know what I do the rest of the time though.
Hi, I'm musician and artist. Love Ssega.
All right. Also part of Hard Art.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'll
yeah.
do it. Yeah. Should I do that again?
I think you can do it again, because then we can get
Yeah. Hi, I'm musician and artist. Love Ssega and part of Hard Art.
Okay, and Liz?
I'm Liz Slade, and I'm the Chief Officer of the Unitarian Church in the UK, and I'm also part of the Hard Art Collective.
All right. Could you maybe tell us a bit about Hard Art in specific? Like, how did it come up? How did you guys join? Kind of just tell us the story of the collective in a way. What the mission is, basically, as well.
Do you want to start, Charlie?
Yeah.
I can go. Okay, so a lot of the people involved from the start were part of the creative team that helped start Extinction Rebellion in the UK, and this is an evolution of that climate work in many ways, but sort of moving beyond climate into the sort of the intersecting worlds of democracy and inequality. And so it was really an experiment to try and find where our moments Nina Simone is, or in Britain we had Rock Against Racism in the 1970s. You know, where's the cultural response that can support the movements for change, the movements for transformation in climate, democracy, etc. And so it's an attempt to bring together different disciplines covering music, art, spirituality, science, economics, etc., to try and create the cultural conditions so that people believe that things can change and that a better story can be told.
I think that also speaks a bit to what I think Brian Eno was saying as well before. You got the genius and then you got the
Genius, that's right, yeah.
Kind of said I think it's a really interesting concept as well to explore. Like you're not really looking at, I guess, for the next Nina Simone. You're kind of looking more to building this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, the scene is definitely the thing because, that kind of focus on the one individual, which is getting more and more prevalent with social media as well. That's just deeply unhelpful.
And I think that's something now that Hard Art have been meeting for nearly 2 years. There is a real sense of community. Everyone turned up in the first session and some people knew each other, but most people didn't.
Yeah.
But now there's real trust and understanding and, a real sense of community that's formed.
Could you tell us a bit about why that's so important to have that sense of community and collective? In a sense,
Well, I think something that we've been talking about is how just as it's not about the individual, it's not about the heroic, amazing artist or musician or actor or whatever it might be. We know that the challenges that we're all facing are challenges that need us not to act as individuals, but to act as a collective, and to know that we are acting not just as humans, but as part of the natural world as well. And I think a lot of the challenges that we are looking at in the world have come about from that individualism and that consumerism and feeling separate to the natural world. And so that approach is not going to help fix the problems, right? So I think that way of being, we just feels like we know that that's the right way of being, that it is about relationship and it's about having fun together as well. It's deeply serious work that we're doing, but it's really full of joy when we get together.
Ssega, I think you also, speaking to a little bit of what Liz was kind of talking about here as well. You've spoken before, I think, or you've acted before on this climate optimism in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a bit to what Liz was saying about having fun in a way.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, so my way in actually was I'm a trustee of Earth%. So from being a musician, unsurprisingly, coming from Earth%, which is a charity that Brian Eno co-founded along with others, and the executive director, Kathy Runciman, who's part of Hard Art, said, actually, as a musician, why don't you come to these meetings where it's people from all different backgrounds? And I think that's, you'd find it intriguing as a musician, and then also with the background of the percent thing, because I think when we're tackling this climate situation, we all need to work together. So it's not about creating this little foundation for this is the Clean Air Foundation, or this is the Portuguese Stopping River Rising Foundation. Everyone needs to collaborate together. And I think what's the main thing and the most powerful thing is to paint the vision of the future. So right now we can have the science and the facts, and we can see, like, so right now we in Porto, you had wildfires, and then now we've got a lot of rain right now. The seasons are changing, so everyone can see the negative side of it, but then what's the vision out of it? What's the joyful way for all of us to be out of it? And as an artist, that's, I believe, is part of your role, to present different options of the future, and then people can then see which ones they gravitate towards. And one of the interesting things I find about Hard Art is the fact that a creative process is being put front and center and shared amongst everybody else. Because it's a very commercial thing to say, you are a singer, you are a painter, but maybe it's just the time that we are at is, I had a guitar, that's why I was in the Beatles. I had a synthesizer, that's why I was in Kraftwerk. But then who's to say if you didn't have a tablet where you could draw and do anything, you wouldn't be a visual artist? And a lot of artists that you'll see who come here and exhibit here, they have multiple different ways in which they express themselves. So the big challenge now is to say, how can all artists come together and use their skills, the skills that we have, we know we can grab attention, and then push them in a positive way to talk about climate optimism. And furthermore, every artist has something that it's based on, and that might be a spiritual thing, that could be a scientific thing, that might be an emotional thing. So to be in the room with different people from the different backgrounds and then to get all of that knowledge, that saves you going on a big old pilgrimage somewhere else, or doing all of that, and it's just all in the same room.
Mm-hmm. So it's about getting that plurality of voices,
exactly,
and that multidisciplinarity as well in the same room, as you said, envisioning something that might be a bit better than what we have now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. I was thinking as well, I think Charlie was alluding to that a little bit as well, when it comes to intersectionality as well. How do you think that racial justice, economic justice kind of link back up with fighting against the climate crisis as well? How do you think that all of these things kind of unite?
Well, I mean, it's all linked, because we've got to think how we got here in the first place, and a lot of it is fossil fuel driven. And what was the scramble for Africa, or the scramble for resources? That was what empire was. It was to go over here to get things that other people, other indigenous people had left in the ground for good reason. So then it was extracted out of it, and then you can see the imbalance of that. So if you've got a system, not just if you can solve the climate issues as well, we're also trying to say, how can you also sort of solve societal issues as well? Because we don't want somewhere where there's clean air but there's still injustice, because that's not really good for anyone. So these things are linked, and I think it's worthwhile at the same time to bring these to the fore, because people who have been oppressed and who can see they're on the front line, or they're in Argentina where lithium is being mined and their water is being damaged, or they're in Congo where cobalt is being taken out, they're the ones who can tell you these are the dangers of what is happening, and it's coming to your doorstep right now. So if we solve it at the source and we don't have that, then we're not going to have problems down the line.
Yeah, we're not going to solve any of the crises by switching fossil fuel driven cars to battery driven cars. If all we're doing is replicating the same extractive, profiteering sort of behaviours where the tiny minority profit at the expense of everybody else, then what's the point? And also, I think as well, in taking a more linked up approach, we in the global north open ourselves up to the kind of indigenous ways of living in connection with the earth as well, that we've kind of been very good at forgetting how to do. So the things are totally linked. It's, I mean, I think one of the difficulties is that it's hard to see where the justice actually lies, because the weather and the changes that are happening to the planet are already sort of baked in to like affect the people who can least afford it and have done least to cause things. But that doesn't mean that you don't try. And so to do things from that kind of restorative place is the right thing to do. And we need to start acting in the right way rather than simply the most profitable way.
And I think what Ssega was saying about optimism, I think one of the reasons why it's so important to have the sort of artists and creative minds in the room is because so much of the work is about letting people see an alternative to the world that, you know, us and our parents and our grandparents have kind of been living in the West in a very extractivist world. And that's what our normal lives are dependent on. And so it can feel a bit stuck to like, oh, well, maybe if I get an electric car, that is enough. Maybe if I get solar panels, that is enough. But we know that it's not. We know that the changes need to be much more deeply rooted. And that's why I think the storytelling and the imagination and the creative visions can help everybody to imagine a different way of being. And if we can imagine it, then we can start to create it.
That's true. I think you need a lot of imagination and creativity to like really think of something that can be a society that can function without following those patterns that have been so ingrained, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that famous Gil Scott-Heron song, "The Revolution will not be televised," but actually the revolution must be visualized, and that's what artists and musicians and writers and etc. can do. I mean, we're in this amazing art space here with like that mind-blowing exhibition of all the art that surrounded the Carnation Revolution. You know, so you don't have moments of transformation without art. The two are absolutely linked, and hard art is an exercise in attempting to kind of convene that artistic visualization of the transformative revolution that our age is calling us to.
That's definitely true. I think it's really interesting what you bring up about, I think, not only the Carnation Revolution, but I think almost every revolution around the world has a very strong cultural movement around it, I guess.
Yeah.
Even if it's clandestine or underground, it happens, it's always there, I think.
Yeah.
And has huge importance. It's super.
And something that I've been thinking about a lot, you know, not being an artist, not being someone from an artistic background at all, I feel like it's so important to see that, you know, culture is just what humans do. Like that's, you know, as creatures, that's how we express ourselves. And, you know, although there's some incredibly successful, very famous people in the room who've sort of, you know, made a living out of art and very well known, it feels important in that space that's not the focus. It's like, actually, this is just a very universal human expression. This is what humans do when they come together. You know, this is what we create together. It's our way of expressing ourselves. So it feels really important that it's a very, you know, democratizing thing, you know, that culture and art is not just for an elite few, it's something that every human does.
And I also think that culture also is a very vague term, quote unquote. You can associate culture with being the arts, being media, but then you can also associate culture with being, you know, ways of living as well. And I think we're talking a little bit about also indigenous knowledge, like how a lot of these peoples have kind of lived with the earth for centuries in a way that's sustainable, and now we've lost that knowledge. Yeah. That's also a loss of culture as well, I think. Yeah. Or it's, I guess. It's interesting to think about those definitions of culture.
Yeah, well, you know, leading a faith organization, you know, I think more and more how unhelpful it is to think of religion as being separate to culture. But we also know that lots of religion has been very extractivist and divisive and, you know, non-inclusive. So it's not to say that religion's got the answers necessarily, but it's another type of culture, you know, that, again, humans have been doing forever. And
well, it's an attempt to try and feed our spiritual need.
Yeah.
And what feeds that now? TikTok. I mean, that's where we've got, religion might have got a lot of things wrong, but what's our modern alternative?
And that's what was really interesting in the very first hard art session, I thought, when, the process that we went through of, in randomly assigned groups of people we might not have met before, going through the process of thinking, well, what is it that you feel drawn to do to address these systemic problems? What's the thing that you want to bring into being? And, we worked collaboratively to come up with different ideas. And then at the end of the day, when we were looking at all of the different ideas, it was really striking to me how much they were spiritual. There was a group that said, we need to create a cathedral to nature, or we need to help people get together in their communities and sing together and eat together, and we need to help people create their own rituals so that they can think about how they're living their lives. And it was just so interesting that of these very different cultural people, most of whom I don't think have a faith background, were really recognizing that the types of culture that have been part of religion for centuries, there's value in them. We can make them in our own way to meet our lives as they are now.
But that's the thing where, with all of this, it's coming with, it's like the youthful eye. So if you see, I've seen young people and school children come around the gallery today, and it's a rainy day, and Joanna, who's been putting on Boyle, was saying, it's a shame that we haven't had the full experience of some of the things. But for the young people, they didn't care that it was raining, because some of the sculptures and stuff, they were still there. So it's that useful thing of where you've got bright eyes, and even just having humility, because different people have different faiths and different religions, which is their common language. So that's what you have as a common language. So then with a message, it's to see, okay, how can you reach out and to speak to people on their common language? And by common language, that could be food. So it's like when people say, let's sit down, let's break bread. So it's like, we know you eat bread, or we know that you eat this type of rice, and then coming together to find that common language. And what's great is then when everybody realizes that, Brian talks about with a revolution is only a revolution when everybody realizes that everybody's thinking the same thing. And then what you're saying, that's why it's great to hear your experience of it, because then you sit down and you say, hold on, I do have a connection, me being from in this type of life or this professional outlook, to somebody who's on this other side. Because again, we look back and with religion and music, even pop music, I love Motown. We think of our biggest singers. They all came through, it was a church and singing in the church. And that was your training, because that's where you congregate, that's where you got all those skills, and that was the language, and then you could go on and do whatever you're doing. So then it's to try and say, okay, well, where can we find these spaces to bring people together to learn? And right now, it used to be the school system where you can go and learn music, learn art, learn everything else. If for whatever reason in different countries that's not happening, then let's be a bit adventurous and say, well, look, actually, should it be happening in the museum? Should it be happening in the galleries? Should it be happening if we come, say, the Unitarian Church? There's more people can come and they don't have to be part of religion. This place is open for conversation, and that's when it becomes really exciting. And that radical, because we should be radical. That's the other thing. It's nice to be radical and have fun. That's the other thing. That's part of the optimism. Be radical and say, look, what interventions can you make to say, we're going to bring these people in? So, for instance, I did a thing in National Gallery around trying to get social housing to make sure people, when they're thinking of transitioning over, you also think about social housing and not people who are rich enough to get this type of technology. But I took black squatters in there. I took breakdancers and the like, body poppers in there. And when you get people coming through, and guess what? They like art too. They like the Caravaggios the same as everybody else. So it's not a matter of, let's dumb it down for this audience or something like this. Sometimes it's just passing through the door and saying, look, you've given me this platform. I like this, I'm going to come back.
Well, you're changing the story that you're telling as well. If a gallery is all about looking back to the past and coming from like the colonial age or or whatever, then it has less relevance. But if you can flip a place like this from being about the past to being about the future, it's not actually, that's not no great leap for an art institution, especially when it's contemporary art as well. So what could happen in a space like this, where people could come together and make and, you know, kind of commune and maybe even eat together and things like that, you know, and how do these, because these spaces can feel quite sterile sometimes, but the art that's in them, I mean, some of the stuff we've just walked around is absolutely amazing. There's that Portuguese flag with like someone's backside in the middle, and it's like, you know, it's like amazing. You sort of look at that and you just go, that says so much about something that we don't understand coming from the UK, but we know it's brilliant. and that is the kind of, that's the sort of the thing that you can, like, art and culture can just do by going, yeah, we're going to take over this. We're going to take over a space, like whether it's a space in the mind or a physical space. And I don't know what it's like here in Portugal, but in Britain, people having access to space to do things is really, really difficult, because everything you have to pay for, you have to, you know, people we don't have the spaces that we used to be able to meet and commune and to kind of like have the time to kind of think and think together. And that's what these are cathedrals to being to thought, these places. And so what can you know, how can Porto and Portugal do hard art? It's easy. You find some people that are well known enough so that if they invite someone to come, they might, and then you invite 50 people and see who turns up. And it really is as simple as that. That's what we did. And 50 people turned up, and then they came back, and then they came back, and then we were like, it's a thing. And what do we do with it now? And just the act of doing rather than just talking about doing, that's the thing. And that's a creative act. That's a deeply creative act. And also the beautiful thing then about people who work in sort of artistic spaces or in like faith spaces and stuff, it's about exploration. It's not about knowing the answers. It's about being able to make mistakes. And so if you do something without any real hope of it being successful, you'll do amazing things because you're freed from the worry. And when we're talking about climate and democracy and inequality and decolonization, and the problem just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you kind of think, well, what can we do? Well, we can start. And art for me is a place to start and to bring in these different perspectives and get like people who normally talk about democracy doing creative things. That's amazing, because everyone thinks, oh, I'm not creative. Everyone's creative.
Yeah.
Everyone's deeply creative.
Yeah, because a politician, you have to get your message out in the same way how a musician has to sell their song and get the chorus out, so everyone's singing this chorus. In the same way, you can't be a religious leader or something and there's no congregation. So everybody has their own, even a scientist. You know, there's a scientist, so with the pandemic, then you needed scientists to say, well, this is why you should have this vaccine or not, you know. So you needed someone to say, okay, we need to get this information out to people. We need people to hear this information, you know. So then we're at a moment where information is everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and even culturally, things are everywhere. Where you can go on your phone and you can see any picture. You know, you don't need to go to actually another gallery. So then the challenge here for the people who are making art now is, how do you make something that's relevant and reflecting now? You know, how are you making something which is talking about now? And I think that's the difference, when you can't just be the fake Beatles, because you can listen to the real Beatles in the same number of clicks. So how can you talk about what's going on now? And I don't think 50 years ago you were going to have forest fires and then floods within 2 weeks of each other, you know? So it's these type of contemporary things that we should be talking about. And then all of these, for my age, it's likely that my life expectancy is going to be lower than my parents'. So whereas before you were selling the dream, like it might have been the American dream where you're gonna keep consuming and doing everything else, and everyone was looking at that. And now we've got these different issues, and now we've got with migration because of extreme weather events. And we've now got to think about, well, what happens now people are being forced, what are our actions over here, trying to consume, how are they affecting other people over there? And what happens when people really are coming up to the coast right here in Portugal, in Italy, you know? And if we're going to have this thing called, because we can't just do things ourselves, if we're going to say we're part of Europe, we can't just wait Britain, United Kingdom, when it's happening over here, when a few people are here. Then how do we get this message across to say this is what's happening, and to come bring a message of love as well, to say, look, this is how we're going to deal with this.
Well, this was also one of the other things in the sort of original thinking of Hard Art, was how we can show solidarity, and so how can people advocate for other industries, or so if like people in music find it difficult to stand up and say I believe this, if someone in democracy or writing is doing that, it perhaps creates the conditions. And so like us coming here, it's like what can we advocate on your behalf, and vice versa? What can we learn from your experience that we can take back to? And so we can like a kind of an exchange of ideas, and that's then like sort of seen us on a much bigger scale, which is really kind of exciting, because we don't understand the reality of each other's local, you know, kind of lived experience, because we haven't spent enough time with each other, but we know that we can maybe bond over a need for spiritual contentment, or food in our bellies, or appreciation of art. We can bond on that level, and that's enough to kind of trust each other, so that, you know, Ssega can stand in solidarity with you guys behind the camera, and vice versa, and know that can happen. That's a really powerful thing.
So I think it's about creating these spaces where people can meet, do things, commune, in ways that, in whatever ways is most easier, most accessible. And I think in the end, it's also all about communication as well. It's all about how can you take these messages to a general public in a way that's accessible. I think.
Exactly.
You're making art to do that. I think.
It's got to be a mix of sort of organisation, communication, culture. You know, everything comes together, and each part speaks to another one. So yeah, I mean, this is like part of our communication, I suppose. We organised a big festival in Manchester earlier in the year. We called it the Fate of Britain. In English, you get the double entendre of like fate, F-A-T-E, and fate, F-E-T-E. So an event, but also kind of destiny. And we had visual art from people like Brian Eno and Jeremy Della. We had films. We had comedy, a sound system. There were democracy organisers. There were people who worked in inequality or race issues, and everything kind of came together, and it was unlikely. And not the kind of thing that you would normally have programmed. And what happened was people turned up and they were like, this is amazing, because it's like, I thought it was going to be like arty and pretentious, but it's really welcoming. And people came and they went, this feels like it's for someone like me, not trendy or rich people that like art. And it was quite amazing to play with those things. So you've got people that wouldn't normally go and see a piece of conceptual art doing that, but they came because there was a talk around poverty in the local area. And so to be able to like mix up that in a space where the invite is welcoming, and then the experience is really kind of kind and caring and loving, that's quite amazing as well. And I think, again, cultural events can do that. Cultural events can create this space of otherness that people kind of understand how they work. You know, you go to a play or you go to a music gig and you kind of know that it's not the same as the world you've left behind. But if people come to that and some of that real world is in there as well, then you've got the conditions where you can maybe like collaborate and work together, and that's kind of the idea.
I think also there's like a bit of a ritualistic nature to like when you go watch some sort of performance, whether it's a play or a concert or whatever. There's sort of like, you know, people kind of gather around, everybody is there quiet, looking at something. And then is what you were saying, like what you're watching can bring some sort of message, and at the same time Yeah, I mean, it speaks to what we were talking about a bit before about this spiritualistic kind of dynamic in a way, or ritualistic type of dynamic.
Yeah, I think, you know, humans are meaning-making creatures, and like ritual is kind of one of the cultural tools that we have to kind of say, right, stop, we're really noticing what we're doing now. We're really kind of dialing up the feeling that we're creating as we're doing this together. And yeah, I think a lot of people's lives don't have very much of that. But, you know, I think something that we really noticed when in the Fate of Britain, when we did the Sunday service, you know, and had we had singing and poetry and people writing a collective prayer. And even though it wasn't religious, there was a sense of meaning and ritual and depth.
We're social animals. We come together to do things together. True. Singing together is like an amazing experience, isn't it? It's we've been doing that presumably since we worked out that we had voices.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing where sometimes it's important to look back and see what we've built upon. You know, see what we're built upon, and then even if you look past the Abrahamic religions, then even if you look at whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Taoism, whether it's Shintoism, there's so much out there that we can look, and some of these things are the best stories ever written. So you might think as a musician you've written a good hook, but has your hook lasted 1,000 years? You know, has that idea really lasted that long? So it's some of these things where we need to look and say, how was this set up? And again, with any sort of religion, they realize, look, let's build a space. Let's build a temple. Let's build a cathedral. Let's build a mosque. Let's have something where people can come in. And then even now, when these things serve a function where now in Britain being cold, these places then became not just food banks for people to get food, became warm banks, because this is where places were warm. So it's like, look, how can we learn about that? Because now everyone has gone through technology and is sitting by themselves. We need to create the things where actually people feel like they can come together and they're not worrying. That's the optimism. Optimism is power within people, and also then seeing when there's not. So if you are going to do like a hard art here in Portugal, it then removes the barrier of, instead of I'm in a queue for this ticket to pay £100 or €100 to go and sit to my favorite thinker, economist or whatever, read to me. It's like, no, they're coming in the space and they're standing on the ground. It's like we are all humans on this planet, and we're all in that same space. So it's to learn and to say, look, there's so much out there that we can build on, and say, look, this is why it was like that. Because capitalism was everybody come over here, not just capitalism, but imperialism was rip up everything you know. Rip up the reasons why you've kept the lands like this and how you've had thousands. Rip up because this is the new way. So going forward, when we're talking about racial justice, social justice, gender equality and the like, we need to realize that we're not coming in and saying, rip up everything that you've done here. It's with the humility to say, well, what are you saying here? How has this been done? What is the way forward? These are